Hello, Mike. Delighted to be joined by Mike here from VWFS. Mike, could you introduce yourself for our listeners?
I can. Hi, James, and thank you very much for having me. So I'm Mike Coulton. I am Fleet Product and Policy Manager for Volkswagen Financial Services in the UK.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Now, of course, for most people who hear Volkswagen Financial Services, they will instantly think of the brand Volkswagen. But of course, you're a multi-mark sort of financial institution. Could you give a bit of background on VWFS?
Yeah, certainly. So we are the second largest leasing company in the UK. And as you rightly say, we are multi-mark. So obviously we do our own brand vehicles of Audi, Volkswagen, Skoda, Seat. But we do everyone else as well. So Jaguar, Tesla, Ford, Vauxhall, you name it, we'll lease it. And of course, we do commercial vehicles as well. So not just cars, but we'll do your vans, conversions, all the rest of it as well. So yeah, all of that comes under the fleet banner.
Absolutely. So obviously a very significant player in this market, and also having quite an impact on electrification of fleets in general. On that theme, you have a suite of tools you've developed to assist fleet managers transitioning from internal combustion engines to electrification. It's the Evolve toolkit, isn't it? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. So probably about 2 years ago now, we kicked off our Evolve proposition. And that proposition is essentially our way of helping fleet managers and their businesses and their drivers move from petrol and diesel vehicles into electric vehicles. So I myself, I've been driving electric vehicles now since 2014. So quite a lot of experience. And that's sort of informed, I guess, a lot of what we've done and how we've approached it. So really, what we want to do is help fleets identify the opportunity that they have within their business for electric vehicles, because they aren't suitable for everyone right now. And we recognise that. But that is growing, of course. We then help them understand the costs involved and potential savings. We help them with vehicle choice. And then finally, we'll obviously support them once they've got the vehicles with all the usual driver support stuff that we do. So accident management, breakdown, glass, tyres. But importantly, what bespoke things are required for electric vehicles. So if you break down in an EV, what's different? If you have an accident in an EV, what's different?
Absolutely. One of the things that impresses us at Pod Point about your tool is obviously you take a lot of telematic data.
Yes.
And that enables you to tell which vehicles in which fleets are ready for electrification today. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, so one of our tools is called Future Fleet Analysis. And what that tool does, as you rightly say, it analyzes every single journey that a vehicle has made. And it looks at journey distance, average speed, average journey time. It can look at dwell times as well. And from that, we can then make really accurate recommendations about which vehicles in your fleet should be in a petrol or a diesel, which vehicles should be fully electric, and maybe which ones should be choosing a plug-in hybrid as well. And so far, we've analysed over 700,000 miles worth of data. Sorry, 700,000 journeys worth of data and 6.5 million miles. So we've got a lot of data as well to support customers even who don't have telematics, to give them some guidance as well.
That's fantastic. And obviously dwell time, as we know, is one of those absolutely critical things for charging infrastructure. Those locations where cars spend a lot of time are ideal for charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
Talking of charging infrastructure, of course, we're delighted to be partnered with you on a few of your projects. And one of those is your funded approach to home chargers, including those costs in the lease. And I understand that's been quite successful.
Yeah, that's been really popular. So we launched our home charge point proposition with Pod Point last year sometime. And we've had a lot of take up with that. So customers have found it really useful. So fleet managers in particular, one of their concerns when moving their drivers into an EV is maybe they're not that familiar with all of their drivers. You know, if you've got 1,000 vehicles on your fleet, how well do you know each individual driver? So a combination of being able to analyze their fleet and then support them with a home charge point so they know that their drivers have the option and the ability to charge at home overnight is really, really important to fleet managers. It's also really important for those with plug-in hybrids, because historically, a lot of people have taken a plug-in hybrid, not necessarily charged it up, but the drivers benefited from the lower BIK. Now, again, we can offer them a home charge point, which means that they've got sort of an opportunity and no excuse to charge it up overnight as well. So they start getting more realistic fuel economy figures out of those plug-in hybrids too.
Yeah, and that is hugely important. Of course, our view at Pod the plane hybrid is a brilliant technology for those who aren't quite ready to make the full transition, so long as it is charged. And if it isn't, then you really aren't getting the benefits of that. So that's a really useful tool and a useful approach.
Yeah.
You obviously have quite a lot of experience now in fleets electrifying. I guess one of the things people would like to know is, what's the driver? What is it that makes
Yeah.
conventional fleet managers want to go towards electrification? Of course, there's a few candidates. We know total cost of ownership, whole life costs can be better, usually are better for most people. But there's also things like sustainability goals, corporate social responsibility targets, things like that. What's the real driver in your experience?
Well, you're absolutely right in that it's a real mixed bag, and it depends very much where the business is coming from. So historically, I guess it's been drivers have been wanting it because of the BIK, and particularly now the 0% benefit in kind that started this year and is going up to just 1% and then 2% thereafter, is a massive incentive for the drivers. So I think fleet managers are feeling the pressure to add them to their list anyway, which is a great thing. But I think the other thing from a business perspective, as you say, is the CSR. So a lot of companies we work with will work with maybe big government contracts or even very high profile private sector contracts. And CSR is a really important part of their tender process to prove that they as a business are doing their bit. And vehicles are a really obvious and easy way to not only change that, but also measure that difference as well. So yeah, CSR is one. And as you say as well, TCO, the costs have got to stack up, and we can help them with that. So we have one of our Evolve tools is a business case support pack. And what that will help do is help a fleet manager take a suitable business case to their board and say, right, download this pack, put our numbers in that are relevant to our fleet, and here's what Volkswagen Financial Services think we could be saving, and these are sort of costs we're looking at. So yeah, we've got the full suite of support tools to aid that, but it's definitely, like you say, a really important point, the TCO and the whole life costs bit.
Fantastic, great stuff. Yeah, we're big believers, particularly in that bit benefit. I guess it's so compelling as a driver, isn't it? But I guess you need to build that broader package of incentives for fleets to completely switch.
Yeah, it's got to work for everyone, driver, business. It's the holistic view, and that's what we try to take. We're not here to advise everyone to go into an electric vehicle today, as much as I'd love to see that personally. But the fact is they're not quite suitable for everyone, and that's fine, because we're helping those businesses and those drivers select the right people for the right vehicle, and that's our absolute mantra, is we'll always put the right people in the right vehicle for their needs.
Great stuff. Now, of course, we've got another topic to cover at the moment. We've talked about VWFS and your standard sort of structure, but of course, these are, should we say, interesting times in terms of coronavirus, COVID-19, and of course, I'm sure VWFS, it's no different. I guess the first question, very straightforward, man. What's been the biggest challenge? What do you consider to be the biggest challenge for the fleet sector today?
So for the fleet sector, I think it's the uncertainty, really. From our perspective, the automotive industry has been massively impacted. So there's been factories shut down. So people who had vehicles on order weren't able to maybe get those vehicles because all the factories shut down and no one was making anything, no one was shipping anything. We in financial services obviously support the automotive industry, so there's down the chain there's an impact on us as well. But as a company, I say we're in a very strong position, both financially and in terms of our order bank. That's still looking very strong. We haven't seen a lot of customers cancelling orders. It's more about putting those customers into extension plans whilst we try and then get their orders pushed through the factories, or replacement vehicles ordered, or choosing stuff that's already in stock. And I think in particular, actually, the demand for electric vehicles, that definitely hasn't, if anything, that's increased. So, the interest is very much there. What's quite interesting is we actually conducted some market research across our industry, so not just our customers, beyond that as well. And 80% of fleets that we surveyed said that the pandemic had a medium or major financial impact on their business, which isn't, unexpected. But what was really encouraging from that was that 50% said they didn't expect their fleet size to be impacted in the next 12 months at all. So that was encouraging. 30% said it might decrease, but to say sort of 50% said no impact at all was really positive.
Yeah, that's impressive, I think, in that regard. I guess it's great to hear you mentioned that the sort of demand for electrification is holding up. I think one of the things we've seen is a lot of, through the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people have noticed environmental improvements in terms of air quality, etc. That's been in the news. And I think there's an increased awareness of environmental issues. Now, of course, how much that is going to affect people's purchasing decisions in due course, we'll find out. For yourselves, mentioning plug-in vehicle demand is strong. Are your sort of targets through the business for electrification, are they staying broadly the same through the pandemic?
Yeah, to be honest. So, we don't plan ahead sort of we're not looking 1 month ahead or 2 months ahead, obviously we're looking a lot further ahead. So, I guess the short-term impact is very real and it's very much now. But as I said, interest in EVs in particular is very, very strong. So, again, going back to that survey, 30% of those surveys said that switching to an electric vehicle was an opportunity for their fleet since COVID. So that could be down to the fact that maybe we're reducing mileage. People are traveling less, and we've proved that you can work from home. So actually, if you're not doing very long journeys anymore, maybe an EV is suitable for more people. Add that into the fact that it's now 0% benefit in kind, and it becomes a really attractive proposition. The other thing I'd also say is that 58% of people said that they did expect their business mileage to reduce as a result of COVID. So not just during it, but as in terms of the long term. So if mileages are coming down, EVs naturally will become more appealing to more people. So yeah.
Because you have less range and therefore less range anxiety to an extent. I guess the counterpoint is your running cost, you've got less to play with there. So your capital cost of your vehicle becomes a higher proportion. But interesting how that all comes out in the wash. So effectively, your EV ambitions remain undimmed for the next, say, 12, 24 months.
Absolutely. If anything, I'd say they're more positive from an ambition perspective. Now, how that's going to play out remains to be seen. There's so many factors at play. Businesses still being able and to trade and successfully trade, and they're in a position to do that. But like I said, at the moment, we're really not seeing as big an impact as you might expect. And like I said, with EVs, it's just it's something everyone's talking about. The benefit in kind rate is almost a perfect storm of benefit in kind, vehicle availability, and now reducing mileage as well from an EV adoption perspective. It's looking pretty good.
Great stuff. So, any tips? So in terms of, you're a multi-mark brand, of course, you might have a slight leaning towards some of the German OEMs, I would suspect, from the first two letters of your name. But we've got a lot of great product coming to market at the moment. What are you tipping for real success in the next 12 months or so?
So at the moment, I'd say Audi e-tron. I'll start with a Volkswagen Group product. Audi e-tron getting a lot of interest and a lot of popularity. So that's proving very popular. I'd say it's the sort of first luxury mainstream SUV of sorts. There are others, obviously, Tesla Model X, but that's a bit niche for some people. But talking about Tesla, the Tesla Model 3 is just doing an absolute storm at the moment. I mean, that's that's selling like the proverbial hotcake. So that's doing very well. Jaguar I-Pace doing very well as well. That's good. We've got the e-tron Sportback just around the corner, so that's been announced and launched now. So orders for that will start coming through, and we expect that to be very popular. Again, a lot of interest, particularly with sort of C-suite directors and that. And I think, to be honest with you, the one everyone's talking about for later this year and early next year will be the Volkswagen ID3. So that's a real game changer, I think, for the industry, and not just because I'm Volkswagen Group. It just feels like that's going to be a tipping point for mass adoption. What the Tesla Model 3 has achieved already, I think the Volkswagen ID3 will do that and more. So yeah, that's probably my hot tip for hopefully later this year, certainly next year.
Yeah, I think the industry stands very excited about the arrival of the ID range in its totality. I think for me, you mentioned the e-tron first. I feel that's like you say, the first sort of luxury SUV. But I think Tesla are a fabulous company. They've done amazing things. Yeah. I think when you get into an e-tron and close the door, you've got that clear sort of build quality. It takes time for brands to learn, and I think that's the first opportunity that people have in the full battery electric world. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that one is doing particularly well. And of course, the ID range, not only have you got great affordable cars, but I think what you've done on the track has been pretty handy as well. That IDR race car, is that going anywhere else?
Pikes Peak.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know. I'm not privy to that where it's going next. But yeah, the IDR is a phenomenal machine, and no doubt learnings from that will have filtered down into the rest of the range. I mean, the on the performance side, the Porsche Taycan is getting some great reviews. It seems to be surpassing the published figures, which is quite rare. Normally the figures are quite optimistic, but all the reviews I've read so far, sort of independent magazine stuff, seem to suggest that it's achieving the figures and more, which is great to see. I'm yet to drive one myself, unfortunately, but I'd be very keen to. And that's sort of another niche completely, this sort of sporty electric vehicle, bar the original Tesla Roadster of 6-7 years ago. This is the real sort of first, again, mass market vehicle in that area. So
yeah, sports car. Yeah, absolutely. I know several sort of Porsche enthusiasts who say flat out this is the best car Porsche have ever made.
Wow, really?
Which is and petrol.
High praise.
High praise. Yeah, absolutely, very much so. Right, let's return to some more misery. In terms of coronavirus, we are still in that world, unfortunately. I'm going to ask you to gaze into your crystal ball. We've talked about, I guess, the shorter term impacts, how we might have a sort of quicker recovery.
Yeah.
Do you predict long-term changes? You had a very interesting stat on some of your fleets saying, well, no, we don't see any change to the size of our fleets. I guess there's a degree of uncertainty on working practices, on commercial real estate, things of that nature. So do you see us having a fairly swift recovery and back to business as usual? Or do you see a kind of an altered landscape in the fleet market?
Looking at just the fleet industry, I wouldn't want to comment on the wider world. I'm not that well informed, I guess, but certainly in the fleet industry, I hope and think it will be a reasonable recovery. I'm not, I wouldn't like to think it's going to be a, 3 years down the line we're still feeling the effects of this, because the economy will carry on. People will still need to work. The question really is, as you say, will those ways of working change, and how will that impact fleets? Over the last few years, we've seen people migrate out of company cars anyway, and into sort of cash allowance and PCH deals. I think we might actually see more of that as a result of this. So as companies look to cut costs, they might like to, reduce some of their expenses, and company cars are, for a lot of people, a nice perk rather than a job need. One of the things we're doing is imminently launching a salary sacrifice product. So if companies want to offer people a cash allowance, what they can do with that is then come to us still as their leasing provider, just as they would for their company car fleet. And use us for salary sacrifice. And for electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids in particular, that is really, really attractive, and the savings are enormous. So I think maybe the total market won't change that much in terms of vehicle sales, but there'll be some movement within it. So maybe out of company cars and into other options. And like I said, I think salary sacrifice will be a big growth area for us and for the industry.
Oh, that's right. And it comes back to that benefit in kind rate of 0%, 1%, 2%. Salary sacrifice can get a bit fiddly in terms of numbers, but really for many people, we're talking about sort of 40% discounts, basically net, once you've applied salary sacrifice, and 0%.
Yeah. So if you're a company car driver, it doesn't really make any difference for you to switch from a company car into a salary sacrifice car. That's a common misconception, because the bit rate is still zero when we're talking about EVs. Where it does make sense is for someone who's got cash allowance instead. So if you were taking your cash allowance normally and you were just going to go and do a PCH deal, cheapest online thing, you will have paid your 20 or 40% tax on that allowance. If you do it through salary sacrifice, you're saving that, and with 0% benefit in kind, you're not paying tax on the vehicle that you're sacrificing the salary for either. You're absolutely right. The savings are fantastic, whether you're a 20% taxpayer, 40% taxpayer, or ultra high rate taxpayer. It's just getting more and more desirable. So
and I think that alone gives some indication of the positivity you've given in this interview. Demand is out there, certainly.
Definitely, and we're already talking to customers about transitioning a proportion of their company car fleet into salary sacrifice as a way of still offering employees a really valuable tool, valuable benefit. It's great for staff recruitment and retention. You're not taking away a car scheme completely, but you're offering them something that not only can save the business costs, but will also save the employee money as well, particularly when you're looking at electric vehicles and also plug-in hybrids.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So when you are talking to your customers, I presume coronavirus is something that gets mentioned a bit at the moment. Are you starting to see long-term changes in terms of people's strategy towards electrification? Are you seeing your clients? I mean, we see general comments about, but do you see this in the fleet industry where people say, well, we need to move faster into this direction? Or are you seeing relatively consistent policy at the moment?
I'd say it's relatively consistent. What I would say is I think the natural progression that they were taking may be just being pushed along a bit more, but it's not I don't think it's a conscious decision. There's not many people saying as a result of coronavirus, we're going to push electric more. I think it's just naturally migrating. So like I said, looking at maybe saving costs through reducing company cars, naturally migrate maybe into, say, sacrifice and then into an electric vehicle product. Similarly, we discussed earlier about people reducing their mileages. That just opens up electric vehicles to more people potentially. If you're doing 40,000 miles a year, it's still a bit of a push to have an EV. It's doable, but it's a push. If you're suddenly doing 15,000 miles a year, why would you pay 35% benefit in kind when you can pay 0%? So I think it's more of an organic thing rather than a sort of a hard push from the industry. I think it will just naturally go that way.
So it's a gathering momentum, not a step change in that regard.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Mike, thank you very much indeed. You've covered all the core questions I want to ask. We asked around on our sales team, see what questions they'd want to ask you, and I've managed to wrap most of those into this interview, but there was one left over. And that was obviously relevant to charging infrastructure. Because we help our customers decide which kinds of charging infrastructure to install. And on the AC side, there can be a bit of a debate between whether we go, and usually we will go with single phase, but there are certain applications where we'll put in three-phase chargers, 11 kilowatt, 22 kilowatt. In your experience at the moment, are we seeing more cars go towards sort of three-phase?
Yes, I'd say so. So yeah, looking back, most EVs apart from Tesla were restricted to 7 kilowatts AC. Tesla would have 11 and 22, but actually they dropped the 22 kilowatt dual charger option, and because it wasn't that popular. I know Renault had a 43 kilowatt AC Zoe, but again, that was a bit of a one-off. But if we think sort of more mainstream, most things were limited to 7 kilowatts, which is obviously a single phase AC supply. What we're seeing now is pretty much everything that's coming out will accept 11 kilowatts. So Audi's e-tron, and the e-tron Sportback, the Volkswagen ID.3. And I think that doesn't really offer that many advantages for home charging because most properties in the UK have single phase electric. But certainly for workplace charging, having the ability to charge at 11 kilowatts or more is a bonus. So, if you think, if you're talking about workplace charging, you've got a car park of 500 spaces and you think, well, 50% of those might be electric vehicles in the next 3 years. How many charge points do we need? If they're all on a 7 kilowatt post or less, then it will take them obviously a lot longer to charge than if they're on 11 kilowatts. So that's definitely something we're seeing as a benefit. Having said that, for me, the really exciting bit about charging is DC. So how much faster we can charge from DC. It wasn't long ago that 100 kilowatts DC, and even cars being launched today, premium ones, are restricted to 100 kilowatt DC, which is okay. But then you look at something like the Porsche Taycan that we mentioned earlier, and that can go up to 270 kilowatts DC. Now, today, there's not many charge points in the UK that can provide that, but we've seen what Tesla have done with their supercharger network. That will grow quickly. And if you look outside the UK and you look more into mainland Europe, the Ionity network does have quite a lot of ultra-rapid chargers. And for me, that's really exciting, the ultra-fast, ultra-rapid, I should say, DC charging, because that will do two things. One, it'll allow people to do longer journeys or choose an EV if they have to do longer journeys more regularly, which is great. The other thing it will do, though, I think it will drive down costs because the more you can charge rapidly on the move, the less you need a bigger battery. So we won't need 100 kilowatt hour batteries anymore to do long distances. You might get away with a 65, 70 kilowatt hour battery. And if that's the case, then that will keep the cost down because, as we all know, the battery is the most expensive thing in an EV. So yeah, that increase in DC charging speed, that's what really, I guess, interests and excites me at the moment, and see where that's going to go, and where will it peak.
Yeah, indeed. I guess it's about additional flexibility, quick charging, isn't it? So three-phase, a few of those get you just that much more range in the time you're parked. But yeah, the DC situation is very interesting. As you say, we've moved from a 50 kilowatt world not very long ago, and even at your 65, 70 kilowatt hour batteries that you're mentioning there, you're doing well over an hour. And a lot of us are real passionate, like you, are passionate EV advocates. But asking someone to wait for an hour and 20 minutes at a welcome break is obviously not particularly natural. So I think certainly we see that opportunity to move to higher power as well. And certainly a pod point is something we're looking at as well, which is great
stuff.
Hear you support. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'll let you go and do some work now, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. Yeah, well, great to catch up. Great to chat. Thank you for inviting me. And hopefully people found this useful. So yeah, thanks very much.
Tremendous. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.